Working with ethics. Of course, ethical decision making, it's not always easy, and guidelines don't always explain the appropriate ethical behavior for every situation. There's a lot of gray area in ethical decision making. And ethics, they come from inside of you. But some questions to help you, ask yourself some of these questions. Is it legal? Obviously, if it's not legal, then you're going to be in trouble anyway, so you shouldn't do it regardless. Does it feel right? That's more of that internal feeling, that gut feeling. Does it feel right to do this? There's also, will it reflect negatively on me or the agency? Would I be embarrassed if others knew about this? And how will this look in the newspaper? With volunteering, and also, can I sleep at night knowing this? And don't make the assumption that when you think no one will know, someone will. Whenever you think that no one will care, someone will care. Whenever you think that it will never be missed, it will. Whenever you think that you're as good as you need to be, you aren't. So never assume, never make those assumptions that nobody's going to find out that you did this or that you know about this, because coming up here in a second, we'll talk about some of the liabilities that go along with that. Your mentor responsibility, you have an obligation to uphold and fulfill the agency's expectation of lawful and ethical business conduct. This obligation requires you to be courteous, attentive, and communicative. Have a thorough understanding of and comply with agency policies, procedures, and practices. And seek advice from a supervisor or, in their absence, a veteran line staff when you're in doubt about the best course of action in a particular situation or have questions regarding policies, procedures, or practices. It's your responsibility to know the agency's policies and procedures and always act within those policies and guidelines. Again, the ethical side of it is that little voice in your head that tells you that something isn't right or you shouldn't do something. That's more of you taking action. Whereas the other side is you have to act, the professionalism side is act within those agencies' policies and procedures. Any practice or activity that you believe is a violation of policies and procedures or is ethically questionable needs to be reported to a supervisor, or if it's an emergency, to the law enforcement. When you find yourself in a situation that may be uncomfortable, but you have the responsibility to report questionable behavior or practice, where do you start? In emergency, law enforcement is the first person that you need to call. Don't call your supervisor, don't call your other mentor friends, call law enforcement. If it's something against the law and you know that it is, then you need to take action right away. If not, contact a supervisor or the client's probation officer. If it's after hours, again, you may have to contact law enforcement, and they can also get a hold of the probation officers too. Always follow up with a written report so that you have written documentation of what happened. Because trust me, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen 10 years from now. You will forget it. As much as you're in the moment, always write it down. And again, like I said, why mentors should report violations of probation, liability. Liability is huge in the world that we work in. And as a mentor and a volunteer, liability is also on your shoulders. It's a body of rules and statutes that define conduct prohibited by the government because it threatens and harms public safety and welfare. As you remember what I said before, the three key components of the client or the mentor-client relationship: rehabilitation, public safety, and confidentiality. Again, it establishes punishment to be imposed for the commission of such acts. Mentors are also liable for community safety. Probation officers are liable for community safety. And accountability is a way that we can work with the clients to help them take responsibility for what they've done in their lives, and I think that's kind of what the program is about, taking responsibility and growing as a person. But accountability, it helps clients recognize areas of their lives that need changed and need help with. Some things to know, this is just a little bit of extra information if you're working with probation officers and you want to sit in on the office visits with the client and the probation officer. Always call prior to the appointment to make sure that the time is available and that there's no sensitive information that is going to be discussed at that meeting that needs to be between the probation officer and the client. And also, a written release of information is also important. No hat, cell phone, or layered clothing allowed in the office visits. The reason for that is if a situation happens, weapons can be put into layered clothing. They could be put into hats, cell phones. It's easy to call up 10 of my friends to get here and help me out. And it's just, keep that in mind when you're going into these visits. They know that as well. And if they don't know that, you give them a heads up. And the door to the back offices of the probation office should not ever be held open. They're locked for a reason. You go in and you go out, but don't stand there and talk and keep it open because that puts everybody else in the office at risk. Understand that if you have information about a client's probation violation, that you may be subject to testify in court. So know that before you get into all this, that if they tell you that they're using drugs and you're concerned for their well-being, that's information that now holds you liable if they go out and get high, for instance, and commit a crime and hurt somebody. Did anybody know that they were on drugs at that time? Well, you did. Did you tell anybody? Well, no. Okay, now you're in trouble. Now that can come back on you. So know that you're going to be called to testify in some of these situations. Not always. A lot of times it's handled through the county attorneys and the lawyers and all of that. Not always, but you may be subject to testify. And also, if you're transporting clients back and forth, be aware that they may have illegal substances on them. And it's very easy to say, well, that's not mine, that's so-and-so's. And then when the officer comes up to you and they don't know who's who in the vehicle, they don't know where the drugs are coming from, they can charge both of you. So be aware of that, maybe have a waiver of liability or something in place that you know that that's not going to happen. A client who is under the influence can act out violently if they're confronted about the use, alcohol or drugs. I know that with people who use meth, a lot of times there's a paranoia that comes with that, and especially when somebody in authority is asking them about it, there's a lot of aggression and erratic behavior that comes along with that, and not just with meth, with alcohol as well. And be sure that you have somebody with you if you're going to confront somebody, because again, accountability is important, and we do want to confront them. That, you know, hey, I think you're doing this, you know, let's talk about it. But be prepared that they may act out. So it's always good to, if you're going to do that, to have somebody else with you. Also be aware that clients will sometimes, like I said earlier, try to manipulate you without you knowing. They like to play one against the other with the probation officer and the mentors. I've come across that personally several times. You really have to eliminate their ability to triangulate with the officer and themselves. You keep them accountable by that release of information, by that communication back and forth. And remember, probation officers and mentors are working for a common goal: rehabilitate the offender, ensure public safety. That brings me to the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, let us know.